Welcome back to the show, everybody. It's your host, John Scardina. I am so excited for this episode. Several weeks ago, I was in Indiana for their full-scale exercise for, I believe it was District 6. It was called Operation Lights Out. You should have seen it on our social media. We had Jessica and Jeremy on the show to talk about that. Really cool stuff. While I was out there, I met a really amazing group of people. In fact, I think I mentioned this on social media. Emergency managers in Indiana have figured it out. They're highly passionate. They're trained. They're trying to do things right. They have this actually a 3-year program for their training schedule. And when I was talking to different people, I ran into this amazing person, Eric, in fact, Chief Eric Funkhouser, who is out of Bargersville. I might have pronounced that wrong.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And he is he's doing some really amazing stuff with drones. And so you might have gotten from the title of this episode, Drones for Good. But really what we were talking about, because I have a drone background, obviously, with my FEMA stuff and doing preliminary damage assessments. And he was going after use case after use case after use case of how they've been using drones to both find people, to mitigate problems with fugitives, from people who get hurt, and people who've been on rivers, and people who've been in fields, and all different kinds of stuff. And I just thought these stories were so amazing because it shows the numerous examples of drones and what technology can do for us in response, especially our first responder counterparts. So with that introduction, Chief, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you very much for having me today. Very excited to be here and to be able to talk about our drone program and everything that we've been doing over the past couple of years.
Yeah, in fact, you've been going. The word has gotten out more or less that you've been doing some pretty great stuff. If I recall from our conversation, like you're in Indiana, but people in like Nevada have been contacting you, and people in Arizona have been contacting you. Can you just tell us kind of like an overview of maybe why people have been reaching out for your advice?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, I'm going to say probably 6 years ago, we started 5, 6 years ago, we started getting into and decided that it would be something that we wanted to offer. We saw that the technology was out there. Our department, there was only a couple of them at the time in the state of Indiana that had looked out to that. And what we ended up doing was we have a community foundation here in Johnson County. So I actually applied for a grant through this community foundation, and they awarded us $10,000 to be able to go out and kind of start our drone program at the time. So, we were able to buy an Inspire 1 back in the day and get that up and running. We were able to buy we got a FLIR camera with that. And we had been working with a company out of Atlanta called Skyfire Consulting. And when we were working with them, we got everything ordered, everything set up, and it came in. The nice thing is once we got up and running, we were kind of, us along with Wayne Township Fire Department in Marion County, were kind of some of the first ones that actually were able to, have those drones and be running throughout the state of Indiana. So, like you said, what happened was we started small, we got a little bit of equipment, and we got started. And then from that point, the word just kind of got out that we had that. So we probably went, 6 months in doing training. We traveled to Atlanta, got all of our, certifications, got our, our COA through the FAA set up and running. And then when it really started to take off was probably the first run that we had major success on. Was we were called to Shelby County, which is an adjacent county to the one that I'm in currently here in Johnson in Indiana. And they asked us for to bring the drone down. And what they had was they had a person that was a diabetic person who had basically low blood sugar, had left their house and wandered away from home. So they had been searching. Law enforcement had been looking probably for 2 hours prior to my arrival on scene. So we got there, got everything set up, and within 10 minutes, we located the female in an open field up against a fence with the FLIR camera. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome. That was the neat thing about it was we actually, every person on scene that night got the opportunity to see, how valuable this tool was, because they had spent 2 hours walking, bringing people in, looking all over the place. with no luck. And they had known that this person had wandered out the door when her husband was home at the time. So, they had 2 hours, looked, couldn't find her. Within 10 minutes of being up, we located, we put the drone right over top of where she was at on this fence row out in the middle of an open field, and we directed everybody in. So, they were able to, we had it on camera of them coming out, locating her, and then she got the medical help that she needed. So that was just the beginning right then and there.
Real quick, we're going to pause for this week's Disaster Tough endorsements. How do you spell Doberman Emergency Management? EOP, OEP, HVA, HMP, Thyra, TTX, Drone, PDA. Whenever you need an expert, Doberman Emergency Management field experts are there for support. Contact an expert at DobermanEMG.com today. The L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio solves problems and is specifically designed for emergency services. How do we know? We field tested it with medical, urban search and rescue, and collapse and confined structures. This radio is amazingly tough. Check out the L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio at L3Harris.com right now. The Readiness Lab is trailblazing disaster readiness. Early access for the highly anticipated course, Emergency Management Response for Dynamic Populations, is currently live. Think you have what it takes? Join us in Atlanta for an immersive experience. Space is limited to 40. Go to thereadinesslab.com/training to learn more. Okay, let's jump back in. It's so funny to talk to you because that's a story you didn't tell me. Usually when people tell me about their highlights, they give me like all of their highlights. But like the more I talk to you, like the more good experiences you've had with these drones. And you're talking about, just like to pull back just a little bit for people who are trying to process this.
Yep.
All the resources of the vehicles, the people, the personnel, the support personnel to go out and to look and to walk, all that time is money. It's a lot of money. And when you went out there, you had yourself and a spotter, I'm assuming?
Yes, correct.
So a 2-person team versus like how many people were out there, and for hours versus 10 minutes. I mean, just talk about the money saved alone, let alone actually helping somebody who was, potentially in a dangerous situation, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So this was 2 hours that somebody was out having a medical emergency, laying in a field. So, if we hadn't found her in that amount of time or overnight, who knows what would have happened or how long she would have been out there. So, and then you're talking about the man hours, that we're dealing with. So there was at least probably 20 to 30 people on scene for 2 hours. It was probably about an hour and 15 minutes into it when they decided to give us a call and to give it a try, just because somebody had heard about it and wanted to see what it could do.
Just do the quick math there of that, right? 30 people, 2 hours of pay, and versus 2 people in a and the fact that you did it in 10 minutes, like that's like the ultimate win, right? Like yes, like all that. So you talked about taking 6 months to do the training. You mentioned a COA. For those who don't understand, not a course of action, but a certificate of waiver or authorization from FAA. It's a special designation so that you can get pre-approvals. I think it's within an hour of emergency services. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the route we decided to go. Instead of doing
the route I went. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And when we first started it, like I said, it was kind of outside of our scope of what we were doing and having that understanding. So, shameless plug, but like I said, Skyfire Consulting was fantastic for us. And they were one of the groups. And there's a lot of other groups throughout the United States that can help get something like that set up. We ended up using them, and they walked us through it from start to finish. So they helped us file it all and everything else.
Well, I'm always willing to get more sponsors, Skyfire.
That's right. Absolutely. Great group.
No, that's really great stuff. And the fact that you went through a training regimen. Now, I'm going to throw this out there. One of the major gaps that I have in like Drones for Good is that like the FAA like 107 pilot's license for like commercial flights is totally different than like doing preliminary damage assessments or doing night flights, for missing persons. So between the training that you did, can you kind of walk through the training that you did and maybe some advice for people who are looking at creating their own training program?
Yeah. Basically for our training, we started off by going down to Atlanta and meeting with that group. So they put us through basically an abbreviated I would call it a 2-day flight school, walking us through all of the rules and regulations that you're going to be dealing with, working with how to set up the COA. What does your COA cover? Where are you allowed to fly? Where can't you fly? Different things like that. And they were fantastic at spending all that time. So of getting us up and ready on that. Then we started working on, just flying techniques and making sure that we were proficient with the drone and spending a lot of time working through that. And, how do you do certain things? So at the time, we had an actual, on the Inspire 1, it actually had a way of like a claw on the bottom that we had added to it. So we could carry, like a rope across on a swiftwater incident, or, different things to, that we could use. So we spent a lot of time going through all of that. From a training program standpoint, it's flight time, plain and simple. Just making sure that you're out there. Flying the drones is the easy part. What I always say is it's when something goes wrong is the hard part, and understanding that. I'll give you an example of, one of our pilots here, when they were using it, basically when they were out flying, the drone itself just kind of took off. And every once in a while, you'll run into some interference and, have some issues with power lines where, the transmission lines may throw off the signal and you lose signal for a minute. Well, I remember this person come running in. I was in my office and they're like, hey, the drone's flying away and there's nothing I can do to stop it. So we quickly, I'm like, did you hit the home button? And they're like, no, I didn't do that. So, just realizing quickly we hit the home button and it came back. Luckily, it was still within, range that we were able to do that. But the hardest part about flying a drone is dealing with those issues. I mean, we've actually, we've had a couple issues on runs where we've had some damage to a drone and different things like that. And it always comes down to losing signal or trying to, make sure that you get it before you have that signal issue.
We had, maybe it was in Georgia for tornadoes. I'm trying to remember which state I was in, but we were working with a team that was doing drones. This is my FEMA days.
Yeah.
And so you can pre-put in coordinates so that it tracks like over, it does like basically a grid run. Yeah. Somebody put in a coordinate wrong and it starts taking off, and we're like, what? And so we're trying to get the drone back. And luckily, like when it gets down to like 20%, it automatically returns home.
Yep.
I was looking up the coordinates, and I when I pulled it up, it was like in the middle of like the Atlantic Ocean by like Africa or something. So it was like taking off. I was like, whoa. Yes. So it's like really important that we figure out, what we're putting in there, how we're going to do that. Because
there is no worse feeling than watching a $10,000 piece of equipment fly away from you and trying to figure out how to get it back. So
yeah, it's hilarious.
Yeah, it happens quickly.
But so in your line of work, I mean, all of the stuff that I've been trying to do is mostly buildings, right? Building damage, trying to figure out preliminary damage assessment. But when you're dealing with people, you were talking about being in a field, and I'm sure you've had cases now where people are in forests dealing with tree lines and foliage and all that stuff. Do you have any experiences working with that and some positives that came out of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you learn the limitations of your drone pretty quickly. So when we started our program years ago in the state of Indiana, DNR didn't have any at the time. They were looking at getting some. And like I said, that's why we took off so quick, was just, being fortunate enough to have that equipment. So we were getting called on missing people, all around the state to work with the Department of Natural Resources. They would give us a call, have us come in and say, hey, we've been missing this, this person that's hiking in the woods for 12 hours. Can you help us? So, one example that we had was we were called late at night, down towards Bloomington. And while we were there, we searched all night with the FLIR camera trying to find them. But the cover was so heavy that you'd only be able to see through, the breaks in the trees. So, we had to kind of change in that one. So there was some limitations. We did everything we could with the drone. And what we ended up doing was we ended up getting, 10 to 15 people together. And at daybreak, we went walking through the woods where the last known location was. And we ended up finding this hiker that was, stuck in the woods and lost. So, the drone at that point with the trees, we do deal with that a lot, and seeing, and making sure that we're dealing with, what the limitations are of it.
I think it's okay to call that out. Like when people talk about like a technology, they're so afraid to like say like there's anything bad or there's anything limitations. And it's like, it's okay to say, hey, this is a tool in the toolbox. it can work for every scenario.
Yeah.
But that's interesting that you've had that. But there's there's one that you were telling me about, a person on a riverbed where like can you tell me that story just like for the sake of the audience?
Yeah. So we would get
Got out of his car or something and ran away, or
which one? I'm sorry.
He like got out of his car and ran away and like ran in.
Yeah. Yeah. So we got called one night. Police called us. They had been on a chase, trying to catch up with somebody, and the person had basically ditched their car and ran into a 100-acre cornfield. And so they were in this large cornfield late at night, and what they had done is they had run out into the middle of the cornfield and they'd laid down. Police didn't know if they were still there, but they called us for the drone that night just so that we could check. So I showed up on scene, had our spotter, got everything ready to go, and we started searching through all of these different cornfields where they possibly could be. And kind of the same thing again. They've been out looking, hadn't had much luck, didn't know where they were at. And as I was flying over this cornfield and going back and forth, all of a sudden we saw a heat signature. And sometimes from up above, you can't tell. You'll see different heat signatures. You'll see animals. You'll see, deer, different things like that. And you have to distinguish what it is. So as I got down on top of that heat signature in the cornfield, and it was way out in the middle of this cornfield, it started crawling. And then I realized instantly that we had it on video that this was the person they were looking for. And, I always laugh about that run because this person realized that we had spotted them with the drone. So, they were on their belly crawling through this cornfield, thought that they had gotten away. And all of a sudden you can see it on the video where all of a sudden they stand up, they put their hands up and basically gave up because the drone was up above them. So awesome. At that point, what they did was they were walking out of the cornfield. We were able to radio to the police department and the sheriff's department to give them the coordinates of exactly where they were going to walk out. So I've got this on FLIR camera of this person standing up, putting up their hands, walking out of the cornfield, and we've got like 4 officers waiting on them when he came out. So that was a pretty neat one to see because obviously, there is no way that, anybody could have walked through those cornfields and probably found that person without that technology that night.
One, you could have had a person get away. 2, you might have had a really dangerous situation that was completely mitigated because you're watching this person walk out. Right. And the fact that, this small piece of equipment, very quickly just ended an entire situation. You have to send me that video. I really want to put it on social media. Yeah. And just to look at it, just laugh at it. But, that just shows like the power of this stuff, and you're walking through these different types of scenarios. Have you had a chance yet to use it? You're talking about the ropes for Swiftwater. Have you used it on the water yet? Have you used it in like a mass flooding event?
Yes. So we've actually used it on all those items that you just kind of mentioned. So Swiftwater, we've been called out with DNR and different programs over the past few years where, a missing kayaker in a Swiftwater incident. Some of those didn't always have the best outcome, but we were able to locate, one time we actually located the kayak, about, half a mile downstream, and we were able to do that with the drone. And then that kind of gets us into the area of, last known location. And then, sometimes it's just waiting on the water to come down, in order to find somebody. So, we've done that plenty of times. You said it best, using it for disasters, it's a fantastic tool. We've had multiple flooding events in this county here where we've been able to go out and, get aerial views of it and post that and show people kind of what's going on. So I've used it in my district to show roads that are closed and you can show live video of, water rushing over the area and kind of give everybody a heads up of what's going on. And those things it's an invaluable tool. I mean, you were talking earlier and asking about, really what it came down to was being one of the first ones in the state that was fortunate enough to have one, along with a couple other departments, and having a supportive department that absolutely, told us go wherever you need to go and help out wherever you can at the time. So that it just kind of, we kind of caught lightning in a bottle, years ago, and still to this day, we still use it. So we had a call this morning, for a 3-year-old missing child that had, gotten away from home, and they instantly started the UAV. And we were on our way up there, and thankfully they found them prior to us arriving. But, just knowing now that people realize how, valuable that tool is, they're calling us a lot faster now, versus waiting, 4 or 5 hours and saying, maybe we should try this.
Man, lightning in a bottle. That might be the new name of this episode.
There you go.
Yeah. You bring up a really interesting point that I've talked with firefighters, emergency managers, law enforcement, a couple different groups now, and those who implement drones and have the support to implement drones,
yes,
every single time it's a win every single time. And I have yet to come across somebody who has implemented, who had the backing and it failed, because it's such a quote unquote cheap asset for a huge win every time. And there's so many different use cases. And yet I also meet probably 5 to 1. That would probably be my guess, of people who want to implement drones, or they even got a drone and there's just no support, so they never get to use it. And it's incredibly frustrating for me. It's like, as an emergency manager, I basically try to think of myself like a problem solver.
Yep.
And I found a tool that can solve so many problems so quickly. And when people can't use it, the frustration mounts. So did you have to go through a process to get support? Did you always have that support? And if you didn't, even if you did, how do you help other people to help them get that support? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that we did back in the day was get the funding from the community foundation. We spent the time to educate the community foundation on what the benefit that would be. So that community foundation runs my entire county. So, we're in Johnson County in Indiana, 160,000 people. We went to them and explained exactly, what you're looking at and what the benefit would be. So, we spent a lot of time educating them and just making sure that they had an understanding. And then we were very fortunate that they awarded us that $10,000, which didn't cover everything. It sounds like a lot of money, but getting everything up and running between the training, the cost of the drones, and all of that other stuff, my next thing was going to my district board and talking to them and explaining to them the need for it, and then getting them to buy in on it. And they did a fantastic job of supporting us. And then, at the time I had a fire chief who was very supportive of, allowing me to basically run around the state and help out on all these calls. So, it didn't just become a county asset. It ended up becoming kind of like a state asset. So, between us and the one in Wayne Township, that's what we did. We would get the call, we would call each other, we would work together, get out and go as soon as somebody would call. And it got to the point to where it felt like we were getting called out 3 to 4 times a week. So, but the problem with that is making sure that you're available all the time. So really it was myself at the time and one other person here that was trained, and we would just, anytime somebody called, we'd go. And that's really what helped get it up and running, to the point now where we've trained multiple other pilots. We've got people on different shifts that are available now, and still have people that are ready to go, and made it a bigger program than where we kind of the grassroots start, that we had. But those success stories, finding somebody in the field, finding the person having the medical emergency, even DJI at the time ran a story on us, finding that person in the field having the medical emergency, and kind of ran a nationwide story on that through their program. And that's where it came back to what I was telling you. Here I am in this, Bargersville, Indiana, which is about 20 minutes south of Indianapolis. And I remember sitting in my office getting phone calls from different places around the country, because they had seen us get up and running and, seen some of the stories that had come out on that. And I told you the other day, I think I heard somebody from Henderson, Nevada had reached out and wanted to talk about how we started our program. I got a phone call from the largest state park in Colorado, and it was one of the directors out there wanting to know what were we doing, and it was just kind of neat to see all of that take off so quickly. And now, the neat thing, I always say it is, now everybody has them. And there are still a lot of places that doesn't support them, but, we've definitely saturated the market, I guess, when it comes to drones, compared to where 5 years ago, there wasn't that many of them. So people saw the importance of it and started their own programs. So our runs started becoming more local, which is nice, instead of going statewide or going to all these different places. everybody else started to have them.
Oh man, I can already feel the comments that I'm going to get on this show because there's like you said, it's becoming such an obvious tool.
Yeah.
And yet I do know that there are so many people who want to, for whatever reason, like you hear all the BS answers. At least I have, like, oh, DJI. Well, you're not flying over black sites, and so who cares?
Yeah.
To, oh, what will the public think? Well, the public apparently doesn't care.
Right.
So I told somebody, it was really funny. They were flying a Reaper drone.
Yep.
Over wildfires, and then we're like, okay, so we're gonna fly our small DJI drone, Phantom 3 or whatever it was, and they're like, what will they think? I'm like, what will they think when they hear Reaper drone?
Right.
Like nobody
Absolutely.
cares. So I think there's fears of people who are incompetent, and I think there's fears of people who. Oh, here's a great story. Dr. Steven Johnson's been on the show a couple times, and for those listeners, you've heard this training coming up in August. He's going to be there, but he talks about how he was sitting around a table with all these military assets, and they were talking about, can the U.S. share with the Britons this document, and they were talking about classifications, and the lawyer came in the room per the request, and they're like, guys, this is public. This is like on Google. But everybody thinks everything has to be classified, right? The same thing happens with drones and new technologies. It has to have like some mass fear. It's like, no, like you're doing it. When people are doing it, it's a win. So
yeah,
anyways.
absolutely. And we've run into that. I mean, we've got a large military installation very close to us, probably within 15 minutes of us, and we've gone on runs down there for, whether it's missing soldier or different things like that, or people that have wandered onto the base by accident, with 1,000 acres or whatever it is that this military installation is. So we've actually worked with them before, and they do have the $100,000 drones down there and the different things that they can use. That's actually one of the locations that they use that. So, but there's always the useful part of what we bring in as well. So. We've gotten to work with the military a couple times, and it's been really nice to be able to kind of see the technology back and forth on that as well.
Yeah, I actually think the military is much better of wanting to find and more open to doing new technologies in emergency management or even emergency services, especially you firefighters. Well, I know how to bust through a door, so why do I need to? But it's really encouraging to both hear these stories and to hear that you're working. I mean, we could have an entire episode alone how you just said, oh yeah, we used radio comms to talk with the sheriff. Yes. How many firefighters have I talked to or law enforcement I talked to where they don't communicate? So the fact that there's cross collaboration there, you're helping each other out. You're ultimately looking for the win of helping people, and it sounds like you're doing things right on so many different levels, Chief. Thanks again for coming on the show and telling me and really sharing with our audience these good stories with us. So thanks again.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited to be here. Like I said, I enjoyed it. It's been a passion of ours for years now to kind of get the word out on, what a drone can do for a department. And, we didn't even touch on everything. I mean, if you start thinking about, we talked about missing people and, different things like that, but think about fires and everything else that we're dealing with, disaster management, like you talked about. A lot of places are seeing these large warehouses built in their area right now. So, having an aerial view, when you're an incident commander on a fire like that, it's huge. There's so many uses that these drones have that we haven't even touched the surface of everything that they can do.
And which means we need to get you back on the show. That's all I heard from that.
That's right. Absolutely.
I'll leave everybody with this thought because you talked about fires, and this is it's always fun to talk to first responders on the show to hear different perspectives. I was in LA, and LA also has a pretty good drone program, and they were flying a drone outside of a cannabis warehouse. There was a fire, and they noticed something on the drone, like an accelerant, essentially.
Yep.
And they were able to radio 12 firefighters that were in the building just fast enough to tell them to hit the ground. The accelerant exploded. All 12 were sent to the hospital, but they got them out. And what would have happened if they were standing or if they weren't, if they were in the wrong location. So just like to call it out. Like, I'm an emergency manager. I care about the strategic stuff, but the tacticians working with other tacticians, what could you do if you had another tool to be able to help out somebody else? Again, great example of that. For everybody listening to this show, if you have questions about drones, you can send us an email at contact@thereadinesslab.com, and we can forward it on to the chief. But if you've been using drones, or if you have a question for the community, what would probably be better in this whole collaborative atmosphere is put your question on social media. A lot of people are afraid to put their questions out there, but other people have those same questions. We can answer it as a community. I'm sure the chief would be able to respond there as well. And, let's do some good in the world. Drones for good. The lightning in a bottle, I believe, is what we're going to call this episode now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, again, thanks, Chief, for coming on. For all those listeners, make sure if you like this episode, give us a comment on social media on the Disaster Tough podcast. Like and subscribe if you're not doing that. And we'll see you for next week.